All right, let's dive right into this explainer and take a look at the secret history of an everyday object that we literally all stare at, but, well, rarely ever question. You've probably stood in thousands of them over the course of your life, right? Whether it's a giant office tower, a hotel lobby, maybe a hospital wing, or just your condo entrance. You step in, the heavy doors slide closed, and boom, there's almost always a mirror. Sometimes it's just on one wall, sometimes three, and occasionally the whole entire reflective box surrounds you. Today, we're going to unpack the totally fascinating reasons behind why this simple piece of glass is actually one of the absolute cheapest yet most effective psychological tricks in modern architecture.
So, why do elevators actually have mirrors? Think about your last ride in one. Ask yourself why that mirror is really there. Is it just for, adjusting your tie, checking your makeup, or maybe fixing your hair right before a big meeting? Honestly, we've all kind of assumed this our entire adult lives. We just treat it as this tiny moving vanity station. Even building managers don't mention it on tours, and architects basically never brag about it in their portfolios. And yet, it's the single most universal feature of every modern elevator on the planet. But the truth is, almost nobody knows the real story behind why it's there.
Because here is the absolutely crucial point. This feature was absolutely not installed for vanity. Not at all. Instead, it was this brilliant psychological hack. It wasn't born out of some desire to make people look good. It was actually the ingenious fix to a massive, massive problem that engineers simply could not solve any other way. To understand how a basic mirror completely revolutionized building design and honestly altered our perception of time, we have to travel back to the mid-20th century. We're going to a moment when the world was changing so rapidly and our cities were literally reaching for the sky.
Let's set the scene. Right after World War II, starting around 1945, American cities were totally running out of office space. Land was super expensive, demand was just exploding, and the only way to get more square footage on a single lot was, well, to build up. So elevators went from being a nice little luxury to absolutely mandatory infrastructure. But by 1947, a massive crisis hit. In places like Manhattan, tenants were absolutely furious. They were complaining to building managers left and right, threatening to break leases and demanding rent reductions. Why? Because the elevators were just incredibly slow. By 1948, the Otis Elevator Company, they were the dominant supplier back then, had a real mess on their hands. Buildings were going up way faster than their technology could actually move people up and down them. The cables, the motors, the counterweights, they were already pushed to the absolute physical limits of 1940s tech. And yet, miraculously, just a few years later, by 1953, mirrors became a standard catalog option, and the crisis was completely solved. So, how on earth did a mirror fix a mechanical speed issue?
Well, when Otis started investigating these really angry complaints, what they found was truly mind-blowing. Their engineers went out and actually measured the wait times with literal stopwatches. The objective reality, the actual measured wait was only about 15 seconds. Even the absolute longest waits in the busiest towers at peak traffic only hit about 40 seconds. Obviously, this was nowhere near the 3 to 4 minutes that the tenants passionately swore they were waiting. The complaints, it turned out, had nothing to do with the actual physical wait. They were entirely about how the wait felt. Because the cables and motors were already pushed as far as they could physically go, the engineers were totally stuck. And this is the exact moment where the engineering basically stops being engineering and becomes psychology. A consultant looked at all this data and boldly reframed the issue. Instead of a mechanical problem, they saw a human one. They thought, okay, if we can't make the elevator machinery move any faster, what if we could just slow down the human perception of the wait? What if the real problem wasn't the slow elevator itself, but the simple fact that people were just bored out of their minds while waiting for it?
This perfectly brings us into the fascinating science of waiting, which was really championed by experts like David H. Maister. As a leading expert on the psychology of waiting lines, Maister understood this really fundamental, kind of quirky thing about human nature. Unoccupied time feels fundamentally longer than occupied time. When we have absolutely nothing to do, our anxiety levels just spike. We start worrying that we've been forgotten. We feel this total loss of control, and literally every single passing second stretches out agonizingly. It's basically that old saying, a watched pot never boils, but applied to modern infrastructure.
Meister actually boiled this all down to a really simple formula. His first law of service states that S equals P minus E, satisfaction equals perception minus expectation. This beautifully demonstrates that managing how a wait feels is just as important, if not way more important, than the objective wait itself. Think about it. Both perception and expectation are completely psychological things. They aren't reality. If you can change a person's perception of the wait, if you can somehow make those 40 seconds feel like a brief, pleasant pause instead of an agonizing delay, you can completely fix their satisfaction without touching a single motor gear or pulling a single new cable. So to stop people from literally counting the seconds, the engineers needed to give the brain a distraction. They needed to prove the philosopher William James's profound insight, which is that boredom results from being attentive to the passage of time itself. Makes sense, right? If you are just standing in a tiny metal box doing absolutely nothing but staring at a closed door, your brain literally has no other job but to count the seconds. Time just drags. So the engineers realized they had to give the brain a job to do. They had to stop passengers from paying attention to the time. They tested a few different things to fix this. Painted walls? Nope, didn't work. Patterned wallpaper? Barely worked. But by simply screwing a sheet of polished glass to the wall, they completely transformed a terribly boring wait into a super engaging visual experience. You see, a blank wall is what we call an information-poor environment. Every second feels incredibly long because your brain has nothing to process. But a mirror? A mirror is incredibly information-rich. You see your own reflection, you check out the people standing behind you, you watch the subtle shifts in the lighting and all those little movements in the frame. Suddenly, your brain has a ton of data to process, and the perceived clock just slows way down. And the crazy part? When they installed these mirrors, the complaints literally vanished overnight. People who previously swore up and down that they waited 3 minutes were now saying they only waited 15 seconds, and that it was perfectly fine. But the story doesn't end in the 1940s, not at all. Because this really cheap piece of glass actually evolved to solve several major modern design challenges. What started as just a sneaky little trick to manipulate our perception of time turned out to have incredibly practical, psychological, and safety benefits that architects still heavily rely on to this very day. It essentially became an essential multi-tool for modern building design. Today, the mirror is an absolute powerhouse of inclusive design. First off, let's be real. Traveling at high speeds in a confined metal box with a bunch of strangers is just not natural for human beings. The mirror creates the illusion of more space, which directly relieves claustrophobia and anxiety. Second, it allows for passive surveillance. You can easily see what the strangers behind you are doing with their hands, which dramatically enhances your feeling of personal safety and even discourages vandalism. Third, and this is incredibly important for accessibility, modern elevators feature anti-shatter mirrors placed at a very specific height, up to 1,100 millimeters. This allows wheelchair users to easily see behind them, making sure they can safely reverse and navigate out of the cabin without straining. And finally, it bounces light around to brighten up the whole interior, all while continuing to serve its original genius purpose, perfectly distracting us from the absolute boredom of the ride. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to consider the massive ripple effect of this one simple piece of glass. Because the elevator mirror was so universally effective, it literally became the prototype for basically every other wait time hack in the world. Have you ever wondered why airports have those insanely long walking corridors between your arrival gate and baggage claim? It's literally so that by the time you arrive, your bag is already there. They transformed your wait into a walk. Or have you noticed how amusement parks move their long queues into these highly detailed, themed environments full of stuff to look at? They are keeping your brain occupied, exactly like the mirror does. Remember, time is not what the clock measures. Time is what the human brain counts. So the very next time you step into an elevator and instinctively check your reflection, ask yourself, where else in your daily life is architecture quietly rewiring your brain and manipulating your sense of time?